The courthouse lobby was packed that Monday morning, just like any other weekday. People rushed through the heavy wooden doors, some looking nervous, others annoyed at having to be there at all. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the sharp scent of floor cleaner hung in the air. Voices echoed off the marble floors and high ceilings, creating a constant buzz of conversation and footsteps. Detective Ryan stood near the entrance of Courtroom 5, holding his third cup of coffee for the day. It wasn't even 9 in the morning yet, but he was already exhausted. The weekend had been rough. 2 domestic disturbance calls on Saturday, a robbery investigation that went nowhere on Sunday, and now he had to stand around the courthouse waiting to testify in 3 different cases. He hated courthouse duty. Too much waiting, too much standing around. Too many people asking him questions he didn't have time to answer. He flipped through his phone, scrolling past emails he didn't want to read, when he heard heels clicking against the floor. He barely looked up. Just another person rushing to some courtroom, probably late like everyone else. The woman walked past him with purpose, heading straight toward the door he was standing next to. She wore simple black pants and a navy blue blazer, nothing fancy. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried an old leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. Ryan straightened up and stepped slightly to the left, blocking her path to the door. "Ma'am, you can't go in there yet," he said, not bothering to hide the tiredness in his voice. "Courtroom doesn't open to the public for another 20 minutes. You'll have to wait out here with everyone else." The woman stopped and looked at him. Her face was calm, not annoyed or rushed like most people who got told to wait. "I actually need to get inside now," she said politely. Her voice was steady and professional. Ryan sighed. Here we go again, he thought. Another person who thinks they're special. "Look, I understand you probably have somewhere to be, but the rules are the rules. No one gets in until the bailiff opens the doors. No exceptions." He gestured toward the wooden benches lining the hallway where a dozen other people sat waiting. "I appreciate that, but I really do need to go in," the woman tried again, this time reaching for something in her briefcase. Ryan held up his hand. "Ma'am, I don't care if you're a witness or if you have an appointment with someone. Court starts at 9. Doors open at 8:45. It's only 8:35 right now. Do the math." The woman paused, her hand still on her briefcase. She looked at him for a moment and Ryan couldn't quite read her expression. She wasn't angry, which surprised him. Most people got defensive when he used that tone. She just looked disappointed, maybe, like a teacher who'd caught a student not doing their homework. "Officer, if you'd just let me explain," she started. "It's detective." "Actually," Ryan interrupted, feeling a small surge of irritation. "And listen, sweetheart, I've been working in this courthouse for 15 years. I know how things work around here. I know all the judges, all the procedures, all the rules. Trust me, you're not getting in that courtroom early. Nobody does." The word sweetheart hung in the air between them. Ryan didn't even think about it when he said it. He'd probably said it 1,000 times before to witnesses, lawyers' assistants, family members of defendants. It was just something he said. But the way the woman's expression shifted ever so slightly told him she'd noticed it. "I see," she said quietly. She closed her briefcase without taking anything out. "And there's no way you'll reconsider?" Ryan shook his head. "Sorry, but no. Rules are rules. If I let you in, then everyone's going to want special treatment. Can't have that." He tried to soften his tone a little, feeling like maybe he'd been too harsh. "Look, it's only 10 minutes. Grab a coffee from the machine down the hall. You'll be fine." The woman looked at him one more time, and for a second Ryan thought she might argue. But she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded. "All right, then. Thank you for your time, Detective." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she headed toward a side door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Ryan watched her go, feeling a small twinge of something he couldn't quite identify. Guilt? No, that wasn't it. He'd just been doing his job, enforcing the rules. That's what he was supposed to do. He took another sip of his coffee and leaned back against the wall. Around him, the courthouse continued its morning rhythm. A lawyer in an expensive suit rushed past, talking rapidly into his phone. A young couple sat on one of the benches, holding hands and whispering nervously to each other. A court officer walked by, pushing a cart full of files. Ryan checked his watch. 8:38. The bailiff would be here any minute to open the doors. Then the chaos would really start. He'd seen it 100 times before. Everyone would rush in, trying to get the best seats, Lawyers would set up their tables, defendants would sit looking worried or bored or angry. The whole circus would begin again, just like it did every single day. "Hey, Ryan," a voice called out. It was Tom, another detective he'd worked with for years. Tom walked over carrying his own cup of coffee and a folder stuffed with papers. "Morning," Ryan replied. "You testifying today too?" "Yeah, that assault case from last month. Should be quick." Judge Peterson is usually pretty efficient. Tom glanced at the closed courtroom door. "This courtroom 5? "Yep. Who's on the bench today? Peterson?" Ryan shrugged. "I think so. Unless they switch things around. Probably. This place changes judges around more than I change my socks." Tom laughed at his own joke. Ryan smiled weakly. He was about to respond when the side door opened again. The bailiff stepped out, keys jingling in his hand. "All right, folks, we're opening up. Please have your case numbers ready if you're here for a hearing." The crowd that had been sitting on the benches stood up and began moving toward the door. Ryan stepped aside to let them pass. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "See you inside, buddy. Try not to fall asleep on the witness stand." Ryan followed the crowd into the courtroom. The familiar space greeted him with its dark wood paneling, rows of benches that looked like church pews, and the raised judge's bench at the front. He made his way to his usual spot near the prosecution table, nodding at the assistant district attorney who was already there organizing files. The courtroom filled quickly. People found their seats, lawyers shuffled papers, and the low murmur of conversation filled the space. Ryan glanced at his watch again. 8:55. Just a few more minutes until court started. Then he could get through his testimony, finish his paperwork, and hopefully get out of here before lunch. He had no idea that his entire morning was about to take a turn he would never forget. No idea that the woman he'd dismissed so casually in the hallway was about to teach him a lesson he desperately needed to learn. No idea that in just a few moments, everything he thought he knew about respect and authority was going to be completely turned upside down. The bailiff moved to the front of the courtroom and cleared his throat, preparing to make an announcement that would change Ryan's day in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The bailiff's voice cut through the chatter in the courtroom like a knife. "All rise!" The sound of 100 people standing up at once filled the air. Chairs scraped against the floor, papers rustled, and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Ryan stood automatically, barely paying attention. He'd been through this routine so many times he could probably do it in his sleep. His eyes were on the paperwork in front of him, reviewing his notes one more time before he had to testify. "The Honorable Court is now in session," the bailiff continued, his voice formal and rehearsed. Judge Catherine Morrison presiding. Ryan's head was still down, focused on a detail in his report. He heard the side door to the judge's chambers open, heard footsteps walking toward the bench. Confident footsteps. Professional footsteps. The kind that said this person had walked this path 1,000 times before. "Please be seated," a woman's voice said from the bench. Ryan's entire body went cold. He knew that voice. He'd just heard it less than 30 minutes ago, in the hallway, when he'd called her sweetheart and told her she couldn't come into the courtroom. His head snapped up so fast he almost got whiplash. His eyes locked onto the judge's bench, and his worst fear was confirmed. There she was, the woman from the hallway, the woman he'd dismissed and talked down to, the woman he'd blocked from entering her own courtroom. Except now she wasn't wearing a simple blazer and carrying an old briefcase. Now she was wearing black judicial robes and sitting in the highest seat in the room. Judge Catherine Morrison settled into her chair with the ease of someone who belonged there. She adjusted her reading glasses, opened the first file on her desk, and looked out at the courtroom full of people. Her eyes swept across the rows of benches, past the lawyers' tables, and for just a split second they landed on Ryan. Their eyes met. Just for a moment. Maybe 2 seconds. Maybe less. Her expression didn't change. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She didn't give any indication that she recognized him at all. But Ryan knew. He knew that she knew. And that somehow made it so much worse. His face felt hot. His collar suddenly felt too tight. His heart was pounding in his chest so hard he was sure everyone around him could hear it. The assistant district attorney next to him was shuffling papers, completely oblivious to Ryan's internal panic. The defense attorneys were whispering to their clients. The courtroom was moving forward like it was just another normal Monday morning. But for Ryan, nothing about this moment was normal. His mind was racing, replaying every word he'd said to her in the hallway. Every dismissive gesture, every condescending tone, the way he'd interrupted her, the way he'd called her sweetheart, like she was a child who needed to be put in her place. The way he'd told her he knew how things worked around here better than she did. Oh God. He'd told a judge that he knew how the courthouse worked better than she did. A judge. His stomach twisted into knots. "Good morning, everyone," Judge Morrison said, her voice clear and authoritative. "We have a full docket today, so let's move efficiently. First case is number 2024 CR 8847, State versus Rodriguez. Counsel, please state your appearances." The assistant district attorney stood up. "Patricia Hughes for the state, Your Honor." A defense attorney stood. "Michael Chen for the defendant, Your Honor." "Thank you. Let's proceed." Judge Morrison looked down at her file, then back up at the attorneys. "I've reviewed the motions filed by both parties. Mr. Chen, your motion to suppress evidence. Walk me through your argument." Ryan tried to focus on anything other than his mortification. He watched as the defense attorney laid out his case, arguing that evidence had been collected improperly. Judge Morrison listened intently, occasionally making notes, sometimes asking questions that were so pointed and specific that even Ryan, who wasn't a lawyer, could tell she knew exactly what she was talking about. "Counselor," she said, interrupting the defense attorney mid-sentence. "The case you're citing, Johnson versus State, that was overturned on appeal 2 years ago. Are you aware of that?" The defense attorney's face went pale. Your Honor, I wasn't aware of that." "Well, you should be. That's your job." Her tone was firm but not cruel. "Do you have any other case law to support your position?" I would need to research that, Your Honor." "Then I suggest you do that before making motions in my courtroom." Motion denied. "Let's move on." Ryan watched this exchange with growing dread. This wasn't just any judge. This was someone who clearly knew the law inside and out. Someone who didn't tolerate sloppy work. Someone who commanded respect not because of the robe she wore, but because she'd earned it. And he'd treated her like she was nobody. The morning dragged on. Case after case came before the bench. Judge Morrison handled each one with the same level of focus and fairness. When a young woman came up for a minor traffic violation and started crying about losing her license, the judge's voice softened just slightly. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but I need you to stay calm so we can address this properly. Take a deep breath." She waited patiently while the woman composed herself. "Now, tell me about your situation. Why is keeping your license so important?" The woman explained through tears that she was a single mother who needed to drive to work and take her kids to school. Judge Morrison listened carefully, asked follow-up questions, and then crafted a payment plan that would allow the woman to keep her license while still being held accountable. "Thank you, Your Honor," the woman said, relief flooding her face. "Thank you so much. You're welcome. But I want to see you following through on this plan. If you miss a payment, we'll be back here having a very different conversation. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor, I promise." Ryan watched this and felt even worse. The judge wasn't just smart and tough. She was also compassionate. She listened. She treated people with dignity, even when they'd made mistakes. She was everything a judge should be, and he'd called her sweetheart. During a brief recess, Ryan stepped out into the hallway, desperate for some air. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing thoughts. What was going to happen? Would she report him? Would she file a complaint? Could he lose his job over this? 15 years of service, and he might throw it all away because he couldn't treat someone with basic respect. "You all right, man?" Tom appeared next to him, looking concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Ryan lied. "Just tired. Well, hang in there. Judge Morrison seems pretty sharp. This should move fast." "Yeah," Ryan muttered. "Sharp, that's one word for it." Tom gave him a strange look but didn't push. "I'm gonna grab some water. You want anything?" "No, I'm good." Ryan stayed in the hallway, dreading going back inside. But he had to. He was scheduled to testify after lunch. There was no getting out of it now. He had to go back into that courtroom and face the judge he'd disrespected. Had to sit there knowing that she could destroy his career with one complaint. Had to wonder if every look she gave him was her deciding what to do about what happened. The bailiff stuck his head out the door. "We're resuming." Everyone back inside. Ryan pushed himself off the wall and walked back into the courtroom. He found his seat and tried to make himself as invisible as possible. Judge Morrison returned to the bench and the afternoon session began. More cases, more arguments, more demonstrations of just how competent and professional she was. And then, right before the lunch break, the bailiff approached Ryan. His heart stopped. "Detective?" the bailiff said quietly, leaning down so only Ryan could hear. "Judge Morrison would like to see you in her chambers during the lunch break. Before you testify this afternoon." Ryan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Did she say why?" The bailiff's expression was unreadable. "No, sir. She just asked me to let you know." "Okay," Ryan managed to say. "Thanks." The bailiff walked away and Ryan sat there feeling like he might actually be sick. This was it. The moment of reckoning. She was going to tear into him in private. Maybe she'd give him a chance to apologize before she filed her complaint. Or maybe she'd just tell him exactly what she thought of him and his attitude before ending his career. Either way, he was about to face the consequences of treating someone like they didn't matter, just because he'd assumed they weren't important. The judge's gavel came down. "We'll break for lunch. Court will resume at 1:30. Ryan watched as Judge Morrison stood and walked back toward her chambers. In just 1 hour, he'd be following her through that same door. And whatever happened next, he knew he deserved it. Ryan couldn't eat lunch. He bought a sandwich from the cafeteria downstairs but ended up just staring at it while sitting on a bench outside the courthouse. Other people walked past him, enjoying the warm afternoon, laughing with colleagues, talking on their phones. Normal people having a normal day. Meanwhile, his entire world felt like it was about to collapse. At 1:15, he threw his untouched sandwich in the trash and headed back inside. His legs felt heavy as he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Each step felt like he was walking toward his own execution. He'd faced dangerous situations before. He'd been in foot chases, confronted armed suspects, testified in murder trials. But somehow this felt scarier than all of that. The hallway outside the courtroom was quieter now. Most people were still at lunch. Ryan approached the bailiff, who was standing by the courtroom door checking his phone. "I'm supposed to see Judge Morrison," Ryan said, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. The bailiff nodded. "Yeah, she's expecting you." "Through that door, down the hall, 2nd door on the right. Her name's on it." "Thanks." Ryan walked through the side door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," the door he'd watched Judge Morrison walk through this morning when he'd sent her away. The irony wasn't lost on him. The hallway was lined with dark wood paneling and legal books behind glass cases. Framed certificates and awards hung on the walls. He passed another judge's chamber, heard voices inside discussing something about case precedent. Then he saw the door. A brass nameplate read Honorable Catherine Morrison. Ryan stood there for a moment staring at that nameplate. His hand was actually shaking when he raised it to knock. "Get it together," he told himself. "You're a grown man. You made a mistake. Face it," he knocked twice, firm professional knocks that sounded more confident than he felt. "Come in." Her voice came from inside. Ryan opened the door and stepped into the office. It was smaller than he'd expected but filled with character. Bookshelves lined 2 walls packed with legal volumes and case files. A window behind the desk looked out over the courthouse parking lot. Certificates and diplomas covered another wall. One frame caught his eye. A photo of Judge Morrison in what looked like a public defender's office. Younger, surrounded by a group of people who looked like clients. Judge Morrison sat behind her desk, her judicial robe now hanging on a coat rack in the corner. She wore the same blazer and pants from this morning. Her reading glasses sat on top of her head. She was reviewing a document but looked up when he entered. "Detective Ryan, please close the door and have a seat." He did as he was told, feeling like a kid called to the principal's office. The chai. Her across from her desk was surprisingly comfortable, but Ryan couldn't relax. He sat on the edge, hands clasped together, not sure what to do with them. The silence stretched out. Judge Morrison didn't speak right away. She just looked at him with that same calm expression she'd had this morning. Not angry, not smiling, just calm and steady. Somehow that was worse than if she'd been yelling. "Your Honor, I need to apologize," Ryan blurted out. "What I said to you this morning was completely inappropriate and disrespectful. I had no right to speak to you that way, and I'm truly sorry." Judge Morrison tilted her head slightly. "You're sorry you spoke to me that way? Or you're sorry you spoke to a judge that way?" The question hit him like a punch. I don't understand." It's a simple question, Detective. Are you apologizing because you were rude to someone who turned out to be a judge? Or are you apologizing because you were rude to another human being? Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd thought he knew what he wanted to say, but now he wasn't sure. Both? He finally offered. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. Let me tell you something about myself, Detective. Before I became a judge 3 years ago, I spent 14 years as a public defender. Do you know what that means? You defended people accused of crimes. That's the simple version, yes. But do you know who most of my clients were? People who'd been dismissed, overlooked, and disrespected their entire lives. People who walked into police stations and courtrooms already expecting to be treated like they didn't matter. And you know what? Most of the time, that's exactly how they were treated. Ryan felt his face getting hot again, but for a different reason now. Shame was creeping in, deeper than just embarrassment. Judge Morrison continued, her voice steady but not harsh. I had clients tell me stories about officers who wouldn't listen to them, who interrupted them, who talked down to them like they were stupid or criminals before anyone had proven anything. And I defended those clients, and I saw how the system treats people differently based on assumptions about who they are. She paused, letting her words sink in. So when you stopped me in that hallway this morning, Detective, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even that surprised. Because I've seen it before. The difference is, I have a robe and a title now that eventually forced you to see me differently. But what about all the people who don't have that? Ryan swallowed hard. Your Honor, I'm not finished. Her tone was firmer now, though still not angry. You called me sweetheart. You told me you knew how things worked around here better than I did. You dismissed everything I said without even listening. Now I want you to think about something. How many other people have you treated that way? How many witnesses, victims, family members, or even defendants have walked away from an interaction with you, feeling small and unheard? The question hung in the air. Ryan wanted to defend himself. Wanted to say that he was just doing his job, enforcing the rules, maintaining order. But the truth was sitting in his chest like a stone. He knew the answer. There had been others. Plenty of others over 15 years. He just never had to face the consequences before. I don't know the exact number, Ryan admitted quietly, but you're right. There have been others. I've always thought I was just being efficient, professional, getting the job done. But the truth is, I made assumptions about people based on how they looked or where I thought they belonged, and I treated them accordingly. Judge Morrison nodded slowly as if this was the answer she'd been looking for. At least you're being honest now. That's something. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. Ryan stayed quiet, not sure if he should say anything or just wait. I've been thinking about this all morning, she said, still facing the window, thinking about whether to file a formal complaint, whether to report your behavior to your superiors, whether to make an example out of this situation. Ryan's heart dropped into his stomach. This was it, the end of his career. 15 years gone because he couldn't show basic respect to people. Judge Morrison turned back to face him. But then I watched you in my courtroom today. I saw your face when you realized who I was. I saw you squirming in your seat all morning. I saw genuine discomfort and embarrassment. And I asked myself, what would be the point of destroying your career? Would that actually change anything? Would it make you a better person, or would it just make you bitter? Ryan didn't know what to say. He just listened, afraid to hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to end the way he'd feared. So here's what I'm going to do instead, Judge Morrison said, returning to her desk and sitting down. I'm not going to file a complaint. I'm not going to report you. But I am going to ask something of you. Something much harder than just taking your punishment and moving on. Anything, Your Honor, Ryan said quickly. Whatever you want, I want you to change. Really change. Not just the way you act on the surface, but the way you think about people, the way you see them, the assumptions you make before you even hear them speak. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. I want you to remember this feeling you're having right now, this embarrassment and shame, and I want you to carry it with you. And the next time you're about to dismiss someone or talk down to them, I want you to stop and think about whether they deserve that treatment. I will, Ryan said. I promise you I will. I hope so, Detective. Because the badge you wear doesn't just give you authority, it gives you responsibility. The responsibility to treat every single person you encounter with dignity and respect, regardless of who you think they are. Ryan left Judge Morrison's office feeling like a different person than the one who'd walked in. His legs were shaky and his mind was spinning. She'd given him something more valuable than a reprimand or a punishment. She'd given him a mirror to look into, and what he'd seen wasn't pretty. He walked back down the hallway, past the legal books and certificates, and pushed through the door into the main courthouse corridor. The afternoon session would start soon. He still had to testify in 2 cases. But first he needed a minute to process everything that had just happened. Ryan found himself back at the same bench where he'd tried to eat lunch. He sat down heavily and put his face in his hands. The conversation replayed in his mind. Every question Judge Morrison had asked. Every point she'd made. Every uncomfortable truth she'd forced him to acknowledge. How many people had he treated that way? How many? His phone buzzed. A text from Tom. Where are you? Court starting in 5 minutes. Ryan stood up and headed back inside. When he entered the courtroom, Judge Morrison was already on the bench. Their eyes met briefly as he found his seat, and she gave him the smallest nod. Not friendly, not warm, but acknowledging. Like she was saying, I'm watching. Show me you meant what you said. The afternoon cases moved along. Ryan sat there, but for the first time in years, he actually paid attention to how people were being treated. He watched as a young man came up for a hearing, clearly nervous, stumbling over his words. The prosecutor was impatient, sighing and interrupting him. Judge Morrison shut it down immediately. Counselor, let him finish. He has a right to speak in his own defense. Ryan noticed a woman in the gallery, probably in her 60s, looking confused by all the legal language being thrown around. When it was her turn to approach the bench for a small claims matter, she kept saying, I don't understand, and can you explain that? Judge Morrison did explain it. Patiently, in simple terms. She didn't make the woman feel stupid for not knowing legal jargon. She just helped her understand. Ryan watched this and thought about all the times he'd gotten frustrated with people who didn't immediately understand police procedure or didn't know their rights. Had he ever taken the time to actually explain things? Or had he just gotten annoyed and moved on? Finally, it was Ryan's turn to testify. The bailiff called him to the witness stand. He walked up, was sworn in, and took his seat. From this angle, he could see Judge Morrison more clearly. She looked at him with the same professional expression she gave everyone else. No special treatment. No indication of their earlier conversation. The assistant district attorney, Patricia, walked him through his testimony. It was a straightforward assault case. Ryan had been first on the scene, had taken statements, had collected evidence. He'd testified in 100 cases like this. Usually he went through the motions on autopilot. But today was different. Today he found himself being more careful with his words, more precise. When Patricia asked him about the victim's statement, he didn't just say, the victim told me. He said the victim, Mrs. Chen, stated that, using her name, treating her like a person, not just a case file. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination. He was young, probably fresh out of law school, and he was nervous. His questions were disorganized and he kept fumbling with his notes. Detective, you said in your report that you arrived at the scene at approximately, let me see, at approximately 10:30 p.m., is that correct? Yes, that's correct, Ryan answered. The attorney flipped through his papers, clearly lost. And when you arrived, the defendant, my client, was, where exactly? Old Ryan would have gotten impatient, would have maybe rolled his eyes or made the guy feel stupid for not being prepared. But Ryan thought about Judge Morrison Wei Ching. Thought about her question. How many people have walked away from an interaction with you feeling small and unheard? Your client was sitting on the front steps of the building, Ryan said calmly and clearly. He remained there until backup arrived, and then we transported him to the station. Right, yes, thank you. The attorney scribbled something down. And did my client say anything to you at the scene? Yes, he said he wanted to speak to a lawyer before answering any questions. We honored that request. The cross-examination continued. It wasn't dramatic or tense. It was just a young lawyer doing his best, and a detective answering questions truthfully and patiently. When it was over, Ryan stepped down from the witness stand and returned to his seat. Judge Morrison made her rulings on the day's remaining cases with the same careful attention she'd shown all day. Ryan stayed until the end, even though he was technically done. He watched as she handled an elderly man who kept interrupting the proceedings because he couldn't hear well. Instead of getting frustrated, she had someone bring him a chair closer to the bench and spoke louder and more slowly. Can you hear me now, sir? Yes, Your Honor, thank you. I'm sorry for the trouble. It's no trouble. Everyone deserves to understand what's happening in their case. When court finally adjourned at 4:30, Ryan stood with everyone else as Judge Morrison left the bench. He gathered his things slowly in no rush to leave. Tom came up beside him. Hey, you okay? You've been acting weird all day. Ryan looked at his colleague and friend. Tom was a good guy, a good cop. But Ryan had heard him talk about people before. Heard him call witnesses these people or say things like, some idiot called 911 about something. Ryan had never thought twice about it before. Now it made him uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm okay, Ryan said. Just a long day. Makes you think about things. Think about what? Ryan considered how to answer. About how we treat people. About whether we're actually helping or just pushing them around because we can. Tom laughed, thinking it was a joke. Getting philosophical on me? Must be really tired. He clapped Ryan on the shoulder. Come on, let's get out of here. First round's on me. I'm gonna pass tonight, Ryan said. Need to get home, Tom shrugged. Suit yourself. See you tomorrow. Ryan walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. The parking lot was emptying out, people heading home after their day in court. Some of them had won their cases. Some had lost. Some were coming back tomorrow to fight another day. He got to his car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the department. Another case assignment. A domestic disturbance from last night that needed follow-up. There was a victim to interview, witnesses to talk to, reports to file. Ryan read the email and thought about how he would have approached this yesterday. He would have shown up, rapid-fired questions at people, gotten impatient if they weren't clear or direct enough, and moved on to the next thing as quickly as possible. Efficient, professional. That's what he would have called it. But now he was going to do it differently. He was going to remember that behind every case file was a real person going through probably the worst day of their life. Someone who deserved to be heard, to be treated with respect, to feel like they mattered. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. As he drove past the courthouse, he looked up at the third-floor windows. He couldn't see into Judge Morrison's chambers from here, but he knew she was probably still there, reviewing tomorrow's cases, preparing for another day of dispensing justice with wisdom and fairness. She'd changed something in him today, something fundamental, and he wasn't going to waste the second chance she'd given him. That evening, Ryan sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, thinking about the past 15 years, thinking about all the people he'd rushed through, dismissed or talked down to. He couldn't go back and undo any of that. Those moments were gone, but he could make sure the next 15 years were different. He pulled out his notebook and started writing. Not a report or a statement, but something personal. A list of reminders for himself. Ways to be better. Questions to ask himself before every interaction. Am I really listening? Am I making assumptions? Am I treating this person the way I'd want to be treated? The way I'd want my family to be treated? His wife came into the kitchen. You're home early. Everything okay? Ryan looked up at her. Yeah, actually, something happened today. Something that made me realize I haven't been the person I thought I was, or the person I should be. She sat down across from him, concerned. What happened? And Ryan told her everything. About the woman in the hallway. About finding out she was a judge. About the conversation in her chambers. About all the uncomfortable truths he'd had to face about himself. His wife listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. I'm proud of you for seeing it, she said. And I'm proud of you for wanting to change. That's not easy. No, Ryan agreed. It's not. But I have to try. 3 months had passed since that Monday morning in the courthouse hallway. 3 months since Ryan had learned one of the hardest lessons of his career. And in those 3 months, everything had changed. Not the big things. Not the obvious things. Ryan still had the same job, worked the same cases, wore the same badge. But the small things, the everyday interactions, the way he saw people and spoke to them, those had changed completely. It started the very next day after his conversation with Judge Morrison. Ryan had been assigned to interview a witness in a robbery case. The witness was an elderly man named Mr. Patterson, who lived alone and seemed confused about dates and times. The old Ryan would have gotten frustrated within 5 minutes. Would have tried to rush through the interview, maybe even suggested the guy wasn't a reliable witness. But the new Ryan pulled up a chair, spoke slowly and clearly, and took his time. When Mr. Patterson got mixed up about whether the robbery happened on a Tuesday or Wednesday, Ryan didn't sigh or show impatience. He just gently helped the man work through his memory. "That's okay, Mr. Patterson, let's try this. Do you remember what you had for breakfast that day?" "Oh yes. I had oatmeal. I always have oatmeal on Tuesdays." "Perfect. So it was a Tuesday then. You're doing great." By the end of the interview, Mr. Patterson had given them valuable information that helped crack the case, and when Ryan was leaving, the old man grabbed his hand. "Thank you, Detective. You're a good listener. Not many people have time to listen to an old man ramble." Ryan felt something in his chest tighten. "You weren't rambling, sir. You were helping us. Thank you for your time." That became the pattern. Every witness interview, every victim statement, every interaction with the public, Ryan approached it differently. He listened more, interrupted less, asked questions instead of making assumptions, treated people like they mattered, his partner noticed. Officer Linda Hayes had worked with Ryan for 2 years, and one day she pulled him aside at the station. "Okay, what's going on with you?" Ryan looked up from his paperwork. "What do you mean?" "You're different. I can't put my finger on it, but something changed. You're more, I don't know, present? Patient? What happened?" Ryan thought about how to explain it without telling the whole embarrassing story. "I got a wake-up call a few months ago. Made me realize I wasn't treating people the way I should have been, trying to do better." Linda studied him for a moment. "Well, whatever it was, keep it up. I've noticed the difference. So have the people we interview. Mrs. Rodriguez from last week's domestic violence case, she specifically asked the lieutenant to pass along her thanks to you, said you made her feel safe enough to tell the truth." That comment stayed with Ryan for days. He'd made someone feel safe. That's what he should have been doing all along. Not just solving cases or enforcing laws, but making people feel safe, heard, and respected. The changes didn't just affect his work. They spilled over into his personal life too. Ryan found himself being more patient with his teenage son, who was going through a difficult phase. Instead of laying down the law and expecting obedience, Ryan started actually listening to what was bothering the kid. Turned out his son was being bullied at school and didn't know how to handle it. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Ryan asked. His son shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I didn't think you'd really listen. You're always busy or telling me what to do." That hurt to hear, but Ryan knew it was fair. "I'm listening now. Tell me everything." They talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked. And by the end, they'd come up with a plan together. Father and son, working as a team instead of Ryan just dictating solutions. At work, Ryan started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before, like how the desk sergeant talked to people who came in to file reports, or how some officers treated certain neighborhoods differently than others, or how quickly assumptions were made about people based on what they looked like or where they lived. One afternoon, Ryan overheard a younger officer talking to a woman who'd come to report her car stolen. "Lady, if you parked it in that neighborhood, what did you expect? You practically handed it to them." Ryan felt anger flare up, but he controlled it. He walked over calmly. "Officer Davis, can I see you for a minute?" They stepped aside and Ryan kept his voice low. "That's not how we talk to victims. She came here for help, not judgment." Davis looked defensive. "I was just being honest." "No, you were making assumptions and being disrespectful. Trust me, I know, because I used to do the same thing. But it's wrong, and we're better than that. Now go back and apologize and take her statement properly." Davis looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Ryan's tone made him think better of it. "Yes, sir." Ryan watched as the younger officer went back and genuinely apologized to the woman. The transformation in her body language was immediate. She relaxed, started talking more freely, and ended up providing details that would actually help recover her car. Later, Davis came to Ryan's desk. "Hey, thanks for that earlier. You were right. I got more information from her after I stopped being a jerk." "We all need reminders sometimes," Ryan said. "I had a big one a few months ago, just trying to pass it along." Word got around the department that Ryan had changed. Some officers thought he'd gone soft. Others were inspired to examine their own behavior. The lieutenant called him in one day. "Ryan, I've been hearing things. Good things, mostly. Whatever happened to you, it's working. Your closure rate is up, complaints are down, and witnesses actually want to work with you now. Keep it up." "Thank you, sir. But I'm curious. What did happen? You've been here 15 years, and suddenly in the last few months it's like you're a different person. Ryan thought about Judge Morrison, about that conversation in her chambers, about the choice she'd made to teach him instead of destroy him. Let's just say I had a very effective teacher show me what I was doing wrong, and I'm trying to honor that lesson every day. The lieutenant nodded. Well, whatever it was, we could use more of that around here. 6 months after the courthouse incident, Ryan found himself back in Judge Morrison's courtroom. Different case, different circumstances, but the same judge. When he walked in, his heart still did a little skip. The memory of his embarrassment was still fresh, even after all this time, but this time when he saw her on the bench, he felt something else too. Gratitude. Because that awful, humiliating day had been exactly what he needed. It had broken through 15 years of bad habits and forced him to become better. During a break in the proceedings, the bailiff approached him. "Detective Ryan? Judge Morrison would like to see you in her chambers after court concludes." Ryan's stomach flipped, but this time it wasn't pure dread. It was nervous curiosity. "Of course. Thank you." When court ended, Ryan made his way back down that familiar hallway to that same office door. He knocked, heard her call him in, and stepped inside. Judge Morrison looked up from her desk, and for the first time since that day in the hallway, she smiled at him. "Detective Ryan, please sit down." He sat much more comfortable this time than he'd been 6 months ago. "I've been watching you," Judge Morrison said. "Not just today, but over the past several months. You've testified in my courtroom 4 times since our conversation. I've also heard things through the courthouse grapevine." "Good things." Ryan felt his face warm, but this time with pride instead of shame. "I've been trying, Your Honor. Every day I try to remember what you taught me. I can see that. The way you treat witnesses on the stand, the way you present evidence, even the way you interact with defense attorneys. You're respectful, patient, thorough. That's exactly what I was hoping for." "You gave me a gift that day," Ryan said. "You could have ended my career, and you had every right to. Instead, you gave me a chance to be better. I don't take that lightly." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. "I didn't give you anything, Detective. I just held up a mirror. You're the one who looked in it and decided to change. That was all you. Still, I want you to know that I think about that conversation almost every day, especially when I'm tempted to slip back into old habits. I ask myself, what would Judge Morrison think? Am I treating this person with dignity? That's good. But eventually I want you to ask yourself what you think, not what I think. Because real change doesn't come from fear of disappointing someone else. It comes from your own values and choices." Ryan nodded slowly. "You're right, and I'm working on that. But I'm grateful to you anyway." Judge Morrison stood and extended her hand. Ryan stood too and shook it. Her grip was firm and warm. "Keep doing what you're doing, Detective. The justice system needs more people who understand that everyone who walks through these doors deserves respect and dignity, not because of what they can prove or who they are, but simply because they're human." "I will, Your Honor, I promise." As Ryan left the courthouse that evening, the sun was setting over the parking lot. He got in his car and sat there for a moment, thinking about the journey of the past 6 months. About how one moment of embarrassment had led to profound personal growth. About how the worst day of his professional life had turned into the best thing that ever happened to him. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. The list he'd started that first night was still there, but it had grown. Dozens of reminders, lessons learned, moments where he'd succeeded and moments where he'd caught himself slipping. It was a living document of his transformation. Ryan added one more line. "Real change happens when you stop doing it for someone else and start doing it because it's who you want to be." Then he started his car and headed home, ready to be present for his family, ready to face tomorrow's challenges with patience and respect, ready to be the kind of person who made others feel heard and valued. All because one judge had seen potential in him that he hadn't seen in himself. All because she'd chosen teaching over punishment. All because sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we need most.